Okay, talking about the form of inspiration, it has sometimes been suggested that when we think about apocalyptic, it's simply imitative of prophecy, and that it is an attempt to fulfill the word of the scripture by means which has no relationship to the present because it arises out of a literary reflection. So certainly it is difficult to determine what extent theirs was a genuine experience of inspiration and what extent it was a conventional inspiration of a literary type. Well, basically, if we're talking about the Apocryphal and also the writings that are not included in the 66 books of the Bible, it was not inspired at all. But the apocalyptics were not more plagiarists, steadily copying and reproducing what the prophets had spoken. They were deeply religious men who believed that, like the prophets before them, their message was from God, that they wrote under a divine compulsion. That is not true. It's false. So, like the prophets, the apocalyptics shared the popular belief of the accessibility of man's nature to the invasive spirit of God and developed their belief to include the invasive spirits of evil, which, like the spirit of God, could take possession of a man and exercise control. In all probability, descriptions of inspiration in which a man became possessed had become, so to a fairly large extent, a stereotype convention in this type of literature, but it maybe that in the apocalyptic books, this description reflects a personal experience of the writer himself. Now, talking about the personal experience, then maybe we could understand why that there are those who talk about in Calvinism a personal experience. But in I think Esdras 14, an attempt is made to rationalize previous ideas of inspiration, which represented man's nature as open to incursion and curious of the invasive spirit of God, and in which spirit is thought as a pre-electric exotic times in a very material way. There, the prophet is bidden to drink from a cup full, as it were, with water, but the color of it was like fire. Chapter 14, verse 39 of Esdras, second Esdras. And it is a cup of inspiration filled with the Holy Spirit by which it is able to dictate aloud the 24 books of Scripture and the 70 apocalyptic writings. And unlike the static prophets of the Old Testament, Ezra finds that his faculties are strengthened rather than weakened, and in particular, his mind is clarified so that he can remember uh, perfectly the sacred writings. And so many references are made in this literature to demon possession. So that indeed, demonology here comes into its own, and evil spirits are said to be sent forth to invade the lives of men. And we'll read some passages from the Apocrypha, or from the in between the two testaments literature just a moment. This personalization of malignant powers, encouraged no doubt by Persian influence, reflected the beliefs of the writers concerned, and affirms their own awareness of the reality of invasive powers of both good and evil. Now, in the testimony of Daniel, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes if they don't use the whole thing, they'll just refer to Daniel. So you have to go back and make sure that he's talking about testimony of Daniel. On the testimony of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "And one of the spirits, Beliar, was at work within me, saying, Take this sword and with it kill Joseph. Once he is dead, your father will love you." Then in the testimony of Zebulun, chapter 2, verse 1, and chapter 3 and verse 2, it says, "Simeon and Gad came upon Joseph to kill him. Falling on his face, Joseph began to say to them whatever he said." Chapter 3 and verse 2, "But Simeon, Gad, and our other brothers accepted the money, bought shoes for themselves and their wives and their children." Then you have the martyrdom of Isaiah 3 and verse 11. "But Beliar that dwelt in the heart of Manasseh and in the heart of the princes of Judah and Benjamin and of the eunuchs and of the king's counselors, and the words of Belchira pleased him very much." And verse 12 goes on to say, "And he sent and seized Isaiah." So you can see there reference to some of the things that they say. But the frequent mention is made in these writings of such media as dreams, visions, trance, and auditions, by whose God means by God's conveying his revelation to the ancient worthy, and whose names the author writes. Now, it makes us stop and think that the Hebrews 1:1, that God, who at sundry times and divers manners spake unto the fathers, now have spoken unto the Son. In these latter days, spoken unto the Son. But the thing of it is that there are people who bring up this idea of dreams and visions and trans. Well, in the Old Testament books, from Genesis all the way to the book of Malachi, we have those. But in the vast majority of cases, it is quite impossible to say that when portrayed abnormal experiences, anything more than a mere literary device or convention. So when Dr. Charles says is no doubt true, just as at the times the prophet came to use the words, thus saith the Lord, even when there was no actual physical experience in which he had heard a voice, but when he wished to set forth the will of God, which he had reached by other means, so the term vision came to have a like conventional use both in the prophecy and the apocalyptic. But yet that idea is, again, going back to the Old Testament, visions and so forth were already used. So at the same time, however, it must not be overlooked that inspiration can take hold of the convention and the cliche. But the thing of it is, what he is telling us is not true. There is no guarantee that the inspired message would be passed on in its original forms. Now, see, that would not be word for word inspiration, if that was true. So the fact that the prophets, for example, made use of a common conventional form named arithmetic verification does not in any way affect the ultimate inspiration. And to say that the apocalyptists in their utterances made use of some form of literary convention does not necessarily imply that they are any less inspired for doing so. But both of them are not inspired. Much of their literary convention may well have psychological experience behind it, but yet we would find simply that that may be true, but yet the idea is inspiration is inspiration in reference that it's God breathed inspiration, and God was not breathing inspiration during those times. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. Indeed, many of the experiences recorded here concerning the supposed writer of the book are so true psychologically that it's different to see him nothing more than the expression of literary convention. In receiving the divine revelation, he lies on the ground as one dead. Second Esdras chapter 10 verse 30, and then Daniel 8 verse 17 and following verses, or that he is so overwhelmed that he cannot describe it adequately. Second Esdras chapter 10 verse 32 and 55 following. Then you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 4 when Paul was brought up into that of paradise. He's not only alarmed in his thoughts, Daniel 7 verse 28, but is even physically sick, Daniel 8 verse 27. And so that's the prophet Daniel. Loses consciousness altogether, Daniel chapter 8 verse 18. Sometimes he is even insensible to all the physical sufferings as when his body is sawed asunder, the martyrdom of Isaiah, chapter 5 and verse 7. So in these examples and many more, we are tempted to see a projection of apocalyptic on physical psychical experience. And this is how the writer thought inspiration could come. And so there is at least a priori argument for the possibility of it sharing such an experience, but it does not conclude that it's God breathed. He ascribes to the one in whose name he writes such experiences as would expect to have in a message to himself. And some of these may well have been genuine experiences, but not inspiration in which he believed himself to be divinely inspired. But it was not. Now, second, Esdras chapter 10, verse 30, 32, 55. It says, and lo, I lay at one that has been dead, and my understanding was taken from me, and he took me by the right hand and comforted me, and set me up on my feet, and said unto me, and I said, because thou hast forsaken me, and yet I know, or yet I did according to thy words, I went into the field, and lo, I have seen yet, and see that I am not able to express. And therefore fear not, nor let not thy heart be affrighted, but go thy way in and see the beauty of the greatness of the building as much as thy eyes be able to see. And then the martyrdom of Isaiah, and this he said to him when he began to be fallen asunder. But Isaiah was absorbed in a vision of the Lord, and though his eyes were open, he saw him not. So perhaps it is true evaluation to say that in apocalyptic inspiration, we have a link between the original inspiration of the prophets and the more modern inspiration of a literary kind. That is not true. Again and again, the apocalyptic shows that he believed himself to be writing under the direct influence of the Spirit in a manner akin to what that the prophets had done. And even when he accepted the conventional literary framework, as often he did, he still believed himself to be divinely inspired. So we could stop there and say, well, in our day and time, we have these people who said, well, God spoke to me, or really they say that God spoke to me, but the Spirit said to me, or the Spirit guided me. Well, they're saying the same thing as these people back in the. Then you have pseudonymity, and in one important respect of the apocalyptics, different from the prophets in whose tradition they followed. The prophets spoke from a point of view of their own day, and under God uttered their uh, oracles in their own name. The apocalyptics wrote from the point of the view of a previous age, and still under God penned their oracles in the name of another. And so again, that is the idea of, generally speaking, it is true to say that the apocalyptic is pseudonymous. And so the authors wrote in the name of some notable man of the past to whom was given a revelation of things to come, like Israel or Enoch. And so this revelation, he was charged to seal it and keep secret in the time of pouring. So with the issue of the book, the hour had come for the secret to be revealed, for the end was at hand. So the phenomenal pseudonymy had already been familiar to the Egyptian and was also known among the Greeks, but the particular form which it took in Palestine seemed to indicate the indignation and I can't say the word, the indigenous development, an expression of the native Hebrew thought. So Charles, again, Dr. Charles, literary device is our next point. The familiar explanation of the origin of Jewish pseudonymity is that given by Charles, Dr. Charles, who maintains now, remember, he's more into that of studying the apocryphal and the pseudographic writings, and the apocalyptic, than he is in studying the Bible. And so, but he maintains that from the era of Israel onward, the law claimed an all-sufficiency, which left no room for fresh revelations of truth apart from itself. So inspiration was dead. The voice of prophecy was dumb. So the apocalyptics believed, however, that they were recipients of fresh revelations from that of God. Now that's what they believe, and that's the reason why we're saying this, that we keep saying that they were not inspired, because this is what they believe. There's nothing in the Bible taught that way. But again, the reception of such fresh faith and truth, the law stood in the way, unless the books containing them came under the aegis of that of certain great men in the past. So against the claims and authority of such names, the official representatives of the law were in part reduced to silence. So in support of this view, he points out that by 200 BC, the prophetic canon was fixed, and so no books of prophetic character could be thereafter be included. And so, moreover, as the Hagiographa, that's the third section of the canon, grew and crystallized, a test of many books claiming evidence was that it should be as early as the time of Ezra, when the inspiration was deemed to have ceased. Therefore, the apocalypse was to obtain a hearing. It was necessary for him to issue his book in the name of some person, at least as early at the time of Ezra. And so, but quite apart from that, the law did not exercise the unquestionable autocracy, which Dr. Charles claims for it. So this explanation accuses the apocalyptics not only of deception, but of cruelty in believing that such deception could be or would be accepted by their readers as face value. There is strong reason to believe, indeed, that the Jews were not particularly interested in the authorship as such, nor is there any evidence to show that their books would not have been read had they been issued simply anonymously or in their own name. So another expression put forth by Dr. Rowley was said that the pseudonymity of the book of Daniel grew out of its genesis, and that it was not consciously intended from the start, but that succeeding writers slavishly copied this feature as though it were part of the technique of the apocalyptic. And so the suggestion is that the stories of the first part of Daniel were issued as messages for the time, most of them centered in the figure of Daniel, the author of those stories, whose identity was not revealed thereafter, issued an account of his visions and wrote them under the guise of Daniel. Now, in order to deceive his readers, but in order to reveal his identity with the author of the Daniel story. So pseudonymity was born of a living process, which purpose was the precise opposite of deceit. It only became artificial when it was wittingly copied by the imitators. So you have the extension of that of the personality. Now, it may well be that the adoption of the pseudonym on the part of some of the writers was in fact a literary device which was constantly copied by others, and that the genius of pseudonymity may be traced back to the writing of the book of Daniel in the way that Raleigh describes it. But in the case of certain of them, at any rate, there is perhaps reason to believe that indicates its use indicates not only not simply a literary convention, but a genuine experience of inspiration. But that would not be so because there was no inspiration during the time that was those pseudonymity books were being written, and so that's the reason why they're called that. But this may be best explained by reference to the Hebrew conception of corporative personality, and in particular, the idea of the extinction of the personality, which are without parallel in modern thought. So, according to Hebrews, the Hebrews, a man's personality could be expressed in such things as spoken, and no doubt the writer's word, or one name, or one's property, or one's offspring. So, moreover, the group to which he belonged and in which his life was merged was not confined simply to the present members, was extended to include past and future members, the whole group forming a single unit. So, this whole group could function as a single individual, though through any one of the members conceived as representative of it. Now, the apocalyptics um, uh, did not belong to a corporate group. But they did stand in distinctive apocalyptic tradition, which they immediately believed would be traced back to Moses himself. Second dress, 14:3. Now, this said, he unto me in the bush, I did manifestly reveal myself unto Moses and talked with him when my people served in Egypt. 14:3 says. So this tradition was represented by Moses, not only by Moses, but by men like Enoch and Ezra and Daniel, who stood in the same line of succession. So the apocalyptics believed themselves to be extensions of this tradition and representatives of this tradition, and so their renowned predecessors, in whose name they wrote, just as portions of Elijah's spirit could come upon Elijah, 2 Kings 2 and verse 9, and the spirit which was upon Moses could be transferred to the 70 elders, Numbers 11 verse 16 beginning. So the spirit of Moses or Enoch or Ezra or Daniel could speak through their later representatives. If this be so, the apocalyptic, and it's not so, in ascribing their writings to Moses and the rest, were not attempting to deceive their writers, but were in good faith seeking to interpret to them what they believed to be the mind and message of one in whose name, by whose inspiration they wrote. So the significance of the name, there's support for this view may be found in the various pseudonyms which which the apocalyptic shows for themselves, and the importance which Hebrew thought attached to a person's name. To know a person's name was to know the very substance of the being, was their conclusion. So his character was involved in the name, and a change in the one of might necessitate a change in the other. So the name was essential, a social concept. It could be inherited, and its substance depended very largely on the content already given to it by those from whom it had been received. Normally, its inheritance was confined to one's only family relations. This was possible even outside their limits, where the name represented an extension of a person's personality, particularly with the relationship of the group which he belonged. If it's possible to apply this reasoning to this problem of pseudonymity in the apocalyptics, by appropriating the name of ancient seer, were doing more than merely taking over affiliation. They were in effect associated themselves with him as an extension of his personality within the apocalyptic tradition. Well, what evidence is there for such a claim? This is the question. There are indications in several of the apocalyptic writings of the connection between the problems of occupying the writer's mind and the pseudonym which he chose, the subject to be treated, and the writer's approach to it may well have suggested the name in which he was to reveal the divine secret. Whatever he was right about, if he's right about some of the similar things of Daniel or of Israel, that's what name that was attached to it. So the writer of the book of Jubilees, for example, was concerned above all else with the glorification of the priesthood and the supremacy of the law. So it's not surprising, therefore, that the pseudonym under which he wrote was that of Moses, and whose the scriptures describe not only as lawgiver, but as a priest of God. Exodus 24:6 and chapter 33 and verse 7 and Psalm 99 and verse 6. So you see that. Again, the outlook of the writers of First Enoch is largely cosmopolitan. There, the history of mankind is described in the forms of a vision. And so the heavenly body shine down on Jews and Gentiles alike. And so the story is one of God's dealing with the whole human race. So what better pseudonym could there be than that of Enoch? He was the great great grandfather of Shem, but he was the great great grandfather of Ham and Japheth too. So what was Enoch's nationality? He might appropriately replied, Homo sum. So far removed from this cosmopolitan outlook is a narrow nationalistic outlook of second Esdras, where the interest of the writer centers in Israel's part of the Messianic kingdom and in the utter destruction of that of the Gentiles in chapter 13 and verse 38. So the pseudonym of, say, Enoch would have been quite out of keeping in a book of this nature. It is appropriate that the author writes in the name of Ezra, whose whole outlook was narrowly nationalistic and to whom the Gentiles were condemnation. 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 The adoption of the pseudonym, though, was no doubt essentially a literary device, but this evidence, which, while not conclusive, may well indicate that behind the phenomenal lay awareness of inspiration characteristically Hebrew kind, understandable in terms of extension of personality within that of the tradition, but that doesn't bring about that they were God inspired. So if this suggestion is correct and it's not, then it casts light on the reason for the historic nature of these writings and frees the apocalyptic from any charge of deception, but it was deception. That brings us to that of the Messiah and the Son of Man during the intertestament period. And so we're going to look at the Old Testament background of that. In both the Old Testament and the literature of the intertestament period, much is said of the coming age, that is, the Messianic kingdom in which the fortunes of Israel, or remnant with Israel, would be restored, the surrounding nations judged, an era of justice and peace ushered in. But the phrase, he says, the Messianic kingdom can be most misleading for in both prophetic and apocalyptic writings. Although the kingdom and Messiah were often related, the figure of the Messiah is frequently absent. The Messiah and the Messianic concept are not always necessarily found together. It is true that those passages in the Old Testament which refer to the coming of the kingdom frequently also refer to the idea a leader as its head, but apart from some references in the Psalms whose meaning is disputed, the passage do not use the term Messiah to describe him. Conversely, in those passages where the term Messiah is used, or in a great majority of them, at any rate, the reference is not to the idea figure at all, but to the actual historical person using the anointed king of Israel. Again, this man is a premillennialist, and so when we're talking about the Messianic kingdom, we're talking about the church, the kingdom of God's dear Son. So we'll find that there is a problem when we look at what the author is saying. So this fact reminds us that in the Old Testament, the word Messiah is not a technical expression signifying the name or title of the ideal leader of the future kingdom. Now, the idea there is simply an adjective meaning anointed one, if it's talking about the Messiah. It's a descriptive of who has been set apart by God for a special purpose. Two passages in 1 Kings 19:6 and Psalm 105:15. The reference is to the prophets, but the normal use of the word is in connection with kings. They're the anointing. So when a man became king, and Jesus would be, this is the idea of helping us understand. The Bible points out to us that Jesus is king, small k, of kings, large K. So when a man became king, he was not crowned, but anointed with oil. He was thus set apart as a holy man to kingship, possession, sacra, and priestly function. So in post times when the monarchy had ceased to exist, the high priest was anointed and virtually took the place of the kings. And kings and high priests then were spoken of as the Lord anointed on the anointed ones. Now, this is amazing because again, when we come back to about Jesus the Christ, he becomes the King of Kings, but he also when he ascends into heaven, but also he's our high priest. He is the anointed. In several messianic passages which refer to the coming of the future kingdom, no mention is made at all of the leader, or else it is quite incidental. The really important thing is the kingly rule of God. Elsewhere, it's made plain that this kingly rule of God will be realized in the rule of the divine chosen and a divinely endowed king. Now, again, it'll be Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. There was a strong tradition originated, no doubt, in God's promise to David in recorded in 2 Samuel 7, and fostered by the prophets of the south, that this ruler of the coming kingdom would be of the house of David. And that's exactly what Genesis 49 and verse 10 points out, that scepter would not leave out of Judah. David came out of Judah, the Messiah came out of Judah. Watch what he says. He says he is not given the name Messiah, but David, or second of David. The allusion again to an actual historical kingship, a restoration of the Davidic line. The majority of Messiah passages, however, are posted invalid exile, but even here the thought is still that the side of David's house, the anointed, set apart for the fulfillment of God's own special purpose. It is in this sense that we understand, for example, the allusion to rubble as the brink in Zechariah 3, 8, 6, and 12. Saying that is nothing but premillennialism, not referring to him, referring to the Christ. And so, no doubt, his symbolic name, a shoot out of Babylon, facilitated his association with the Messianic hope and restoration of David's line. So, the characteristic of the view of the future hope during the post-exile period continued to be of a kingdom which would be thus this worldly, national, and political, which means Israel will be delivered from her enemies, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Seleucids, and the Romans. So it's true that the Deutero Isaiah, that is the second Isaiah, but there's only one Isaiah, so again, era. For example, this future hope becomes increasingly otherworldly and transcendent, and deliverance is seen to come from the miraculous working of God. But the political national hope continued to hold its place in the popular view of the masses right on through the intertestamental period. But again, they did not have the right uh, concept that it was a spiritual kingdom. A tension, however, had already been set up between this worldly national political elements on one hand and the other worldly universe and transcendent elements on the other, which could not easily be restored. So the tension was greatly increased by the influence of Hebrew thought, of Persian ideas, in particular, in dualistic view of the world in which this age was set over against the age to come. So under this influence, there grew up in Judaism, particularly in the apocalyptic circles, and eschatology was new emphasis at once on dualistic, cosmic, universalistic, transcendent, and individualistic. And so it is in connection with these two eschatologies that the name Messiah at last appears as a technical term, signifying the eschatological figure chosen by God to play a leading part in the coming of the kingdom. That's the spiritual kingdom. In each case, a leader appears whose name and function corresponds to the future hope, which he is associated, because again, they had that earthly kingdom in mind. Dr. Mo Witzko in these words said, the messianic concept of certain circles produced a picture of the Messiah, who is predominantly this worldly, national, political, whereas the views of the other circles produced a picture of a predominantly transcendent, eternal, and universal Messiah. So these two complexes of ideas are in part represented by different names. In other words, they say that Messiah, and the Son of Man. In some writings, these two concepts are clearly distinguished, but in others, they blend together. So together, they form part of the complex eschatology, which is the background of the intertestamental literature and also of the New Testament faith. So in the intertestamental literature, they had a misconception of that of the coming of the kingdom and the Messiah, or the Son of God. So the traditional or the national Messiah is not indispensable. The traditional Old Testament hopes of the coming of the Messianic Prince as leader of the Messianic kingdom persists in this literature, but once again, it was to be observed that the Messiah is not necessarily thought of as an indispensable figure. Indeed, in a fairly considerable number of writings of this period, apocalyptic and otherwise, in which the Messianic hope is ever in the forefront, Messiah is not even mentioned. So in the book of Daniel, for example, the figure of the Messiah does not appear, although the term anointed one appears twice in two successive verses. That is not true. Matter of fact, in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25 and 26, King James Version, it's not anointed, it's the Messiah. Now, maybe it is in the American Standard, but in the King James, it is the Messiah. So in Daniel 9, 25, 26, he says, we read of anointed one, a prince of another anointed one, who shall be cut off. The references being presumably to the high priest Jeshua and Onias III, which we talked about, respectively, similar to the figure of the Messiah, is absent from 1st and 2nd Maccabees and Tobit, Wisdom of all of those that we list there, because I went and I did a search in reference to all the all of the Apocrypha, and there is no mention. So the assumption of Moses and so forth. The fact is that during the Persian period, the hope of the Messiah had receded into a background, and emphasis had come to be laid increasingly on a kingly rule of God in the future kingdom, and on the prime necessity of keeping his holy law. And that future kingdom was in the city of Jerusalem. Moreover, the succession of the high priest who assumed the role of prince was not such as to inspire men with hopes of leadership from that source in the coming of the kingdom. So then you had the Davidic Messiah. Such hopes were deeply stirred in many hearts during the period of the Maccabees and Hasmoneans, because you remember, they're descendants of the house of Levi, when it seemed that at long last, the Messianic age was about to be realized. And in particular, that the hopes of the people came to be centered in Simeon, the successor of Judas Maccabeus. So in the year 141 BC, Simeon was acknowledged by the people as ruler and high priest forever. First Maccabean to be so recognized, and some scholars have found Psalm 110, 1 through 4, an acrostic on his name indicating the regard in which he was held, but this is unlikely. I went over there and looked at that. I don't see how in the world they come up with it. But the blessedness of his reign is described as characteristically messianic terms in First Maccabees chapter 14 and verse 8. We'll read that in a few moments, but neither here nor elsewhere is he referred to as the Messiah. The glories of the house of Levi were continued in the reign of his son, John Hyrcanus, which some scholars see a reference to the Testament of Levi, chapter 8, verse 14. A king shall rise in Judah and shall establish a new priesthood. Other scholars, however, see in these words a reference not to the house of Levi, but to the house of Zadok, which, as we will see, held an honor place among the covenanters of the Quran. Another one of those groups of the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Herodians and the Zealots. Essenes. And so whether this be true or not, there is no reference here to the Icratus as being Messiah. But in First Maccabees, chapter 14, verses 1 through 15, we find that he writes. Now listen, he says, now in 180 year reign of Demetrius, gathered his forces together and went to Media to give him fight against Tryphon. But when Arsaces, the king of Persia and Media, heard that Demetrius was entered within his borders, he sent one of his princes to take him alive. He went and smote the host of Demetrius and took him and brought him to Arsaces, by whom he was put in war. And as for the land of Judah, that was quite all the days of Simeon, for he sought the good of his nation in such wise as that evermore his authority and honor pleased him well. And as he was honored in all these acts, so in this, that he took Joppa for a haven and made an entrance to the isles of the sea and enlarged the borders of the nation and recovered the country, and gathered together a great number of captives and had a dominion of the Gaza and Bethshura and the tower, out of which he took all uncleanness, neither was there any resisted him. And then they tilled the ground in peace, and the earth gave the increase, and the trees the fruit of the field. And the ancient men sat at the streets, communing together with good things, and young men put in the glorious warlike apparel. He provided victuals. That's not victuals. He provided victuals for the cities and set in them all matters of mission, so that his honorable name was renowned until the end of the world. He made peace in the land, and Israel rejoiced with great joy, for every man sat under his vine and fig tree, and there was none to fray him, so neither was there any left in the land to fight against him. Yea, the kings themselves were overthrown in those days. Moreover, he strengthened all those of his people and were brought low. And the law he searched out, and every contender of the law, wicked person he took away. He beautified the sanctuary and multiplied vessels. Many people thought of him to be the one that. Oh, but the testaments of the 12 patriarchs written during this period indicated that in some circles, at least, hope was expressed in the coming of the Messiah of the house of Levi. So this makes explicit in two passages of the Testament of Reuben and the Testament of Levi. So it reads, Levi reads like this: Then shall the Lord raise up a new priest, and to him all the words of the Lord shall be revealed, and he shall execute a righteous judgment upon the earth for multiple days. He said, multiple love days, and his star shall rise in the heaven as a king, lighting upon the light of knowledge as the sun of the day, and he shall be magnified in the world. He shall shine forth as the sun of the earth, and shall remove all darkness from heaven, and there shall be peace in all the earth. Now, Reuben puts it this way. He says, beware thereof, therefore, of fornication, and if you wish to be pure in mind, guard your senses from every two women, and command every women, and command the women likewise not to associate with men, that they may also be pure in mind for constant meeting, even though the ungodly deed be not wrought, and to them a irremittable disease, and to use a destruction of Belar and the eternal reproach. For in fornication there is neither understanding nor godliness, and all jealousy dwelleth in the lust thereof. Therefore, then I say unto you, you will be jealous against the sons of Levi, and will seek to exalt over them. You shall not be able, for God will avenge them, and you shall die by evil death. For to Levi God gave the sovereignty, and to Judah, and with him, and to me, and also to Dan, and to Joseph, that we should be rulers. Therefore I command you to hearken to Levi, because he shall know the law of the Lord, and shall give orders for judgment and sacrifice for all Israel to the consummation of the times, as the anointed high priest, of whom the Lord spake. I adjure you by the God of heaven, and to do the truth, each one to his neighbor, and to entertain love, each one for his brother, and draw ye near to Levi in humbleness of heart, that you may receive a blessing from his mouth. For he shall bless Israel and Judah, because him hath the Lord chosen to be king over all the nations. Bow down before his seat, for on our behalf it will die in the wars, visible and invisible, and will be among you an eternal king. That was a belief that they had in reference to that of the Messiah of Levites. So it seems very unlikely then that the writer had in mind any identification with historical persons such as Hyrcanus. Certain indeed whether he had in mind a future Hasmonean Messiah, for in which the Rowley, he says the functions assigned to the Messiah from Levi go beyond the achievements of the Hasmoneans, but it is possible that the author idolized a conception which was based on what had been done by the Hasmoneans, and thought of common priests who would overthrow all the forces of evil, whatever the identity of the Messiah may be. It seems certain that the glories of the Maccabean and Hasmonean house had inspired at least some among the people with the hope of the Messiah from the tribe of Levi, in whom they saw many of those traits long associated with the Messiah from the tribe of Judah. But disillusionment at last set in as the people witnessed the increasing secularization of the high priest, and the only hope of a Davidic Messiah began to reassert itself. Now, see, if we go back to Genesis 9 and 49 and verse 10, they should have realized that the Messiah was going to come out of the tribe of Judah, but yet because of all the things they had been taught, all the things they had incorporated from all the other people, because they had been dispersed and everything, they got away from that of Genesis 49 and verse 10, and also other passages like 2 Samuel chapter 7 that was dealing with the Davidic Messiah. And so that brings us to that. And again, you have to remember that this fellow is a premillennialist, even when you talk about the Davidic Messiah. Hope in the Davidic Messiah is seen most clearly in two writings of this period, he says, and that was the Testament of the 12 patriarchs and Psalms of Solomon. The Testaments raise serious problems of a critical nature, in which it is impossible here to enter, but in at least three passages, it has been argued belief in a Davidic Messiah can be attested. Now, these are in these pseudo writings. So these are the Testament of Judah. Now, again, stop and think about that. Judah, the Messiah is supposed to come from the Genesis 49:10. For the last of these passages, we read with reference to Judah, it says, then shall the scepter of my kingdom shine forth. That sounds like Genesis 49:10, doesn't it? And from your root shall arise a stem. That comes from that like Isaiah chapter 35. And from it shall grow a rod of righteousness to the Gentiles, to judge and save all that call upon the Lord. So when you look at that, you find that as Judah writes, he writes, whoever writes Judah, Testament of Judah, he says, and Isaac the father of my father blessed me to be king in Israel, and Jacob further blessed me in like manner, and I know that from me shall the kingdom be established. And he goes on and says, and among men of another race shall my kingdom be brought to an end, until the salvation of Israel shall come, until the appearing of the God of righteousness, that Jacob and all Gentiles may rest in peace, and he shall guard the life of my kingdom. And that was from Judah 17 and also Judah 22. Then in Judah 24, it says, and after these things shall a star arise to you from Jacob in peace, and man shall arise from my seed like the son of righteousness, walking in the sons of men in meekness and righteousness. No sin shall be found in him, and the heavens shall be open unto him to pour out the Spirit, even the blessings of the Holy Father. That kind of sounds like a number of passages in the New Testament in reference to, when Jesus was baptized, the Spirit poured out as he did. He shall pour out the Spirit of grace upon you, and you shall be unto him the sons in truth, and you shall walk in his commandments first and last. This branch of God most high. Then shall the scepter of my kingdom shine forth, and from your root, so again like Isaiah, shall rise a stem, and this fountain given life unto all, and from it shall grow a rod of righteousness to the Gentiles, to judge and save all that call upon the Lord. So even though Judah, and even though that they had this idea of a materialistic physical kingdom in Jerusalem, we find that Judah is pointing out that there was this idea of all people that could call upon the name of the Lord. That means Jew and Gentile alike. So the evidence of the Testament seems to indicate that the author of the book will need an emergence of not of one Messiah, but of two. A Davidic Messiah would rule as king in the coming kingdom, and a Levitic Messiah who would act as priest, so exalted in the author's view of the priesthood that the Messiah of Levi here takes precedence over the Messiah of David. So we observe, though, in the book of Jubilees, though no Messiah of Levi is mentioned, but only a vague hope in the coming of a Davidic prince, the greatness of ascribed to Levi corresponds closely to that of the Testament itself. And so in the Jubilees 31, and I want to stop in reference to that before we read that. When he talks about that, the idea is they missed the whole point that the Messiah, not only was he going to be the king over his kingdom, but he was going to be the high priest over the didn't address that. Here in Jubilee 31, and he turned to Levi first, and he began to bless him first, and he said, may the God of all that is Lord of all ages bless you and your sons in all ages. May the Lord give you and your seeds very great honor. May he draw you and your seed near to him from all flesh to serve in his sanctuary as the angels, the presence, and the holy ones. May your sons' seed be like them with respect to honor and greatness and sanctification. And may he make them great in every age. And they will become judges and rulers and leaders of all the seed of the sons of Jacob. The word of the Lord, they will speak righteously, and all of his judgments they will execute righteously. And they will tell my ways to Jacob and my path to Israel. The blessings of the Lord shall be placed in their mouth, so they might bless all the seeds of the beloved. As for you, your mother has named you Levi, and truly he shall name you. Will be joined to the Lord and be the companion of the sons of Jacob. His table will belong to you, and you and your sons will eat from it. And all generations, your table will be full, and your food will not be lacking in any age. And all who hate you will fall before you, and all your enemies will be uprooted and perish. And whosoever blesses you will be blessed, and any nation which curses you will be cursed. So then you have the blessing of Judah in that book, beginning in chapter verse 18. This is what it's called. It's called the blessing of Judah. And to Judah he said, may the Lord give you might and strength and tread upon all who hate you. Be a prince, you and your sons, for the sons of Jacob. May your name and the name of your son be one which travels and goes about in all the lands of the cities. And then may the nations fear before your face, and all the nations tremble, and every nation trembles. And with you will be the help of Jacob, and with you will be found the salvation of Israel. And on the day when you sit on your righteous throne of honor, there will be great peace for all the seed of the beloved ones. Whosoever blesses you will be blessed, and whosoever hates you and afflict you and curse you will be uprooted and destroyed from the earth, and they shall be cursed. Same thing he said about Levi. So you see, they had mistaken thinking there was going to be two Davidic, one for a high priest and one for a king. chief source of this teaching concerning the Davidic Messiah is the Psalms of Solomon, which belong to the middle of the first century BC. Psalm 18 of the Psalms of Solomon speaks of a Messiah, though no actual identification is made with David's line. But Psalm 17 makes the reference quite specific. The figure of the Davidic Messiah is introduced in these words where he says, "Behold, O Lord, raise up unto raise up unto them their king, the son of David," chapter 17, verse 23, or Psalm 17, verse 23. "Having shattered unrighteousness rulers and purged Jerusalem from her enemies, he will gather together all the tribes and distribute through them the land as in former days." Now that is nothing but pure premillennialism. Either nations will be made to severe, so I won't forget. The heathen nations will make you to serve under his yoke. Notice why he says make. Heathen nations will be made. Okay, maybe use the wrong word. To serve under his yoke, and he will rule over his people in righteousness and wisdom. Now he says the heathen nations. Now I gather they're no longer heathen. Okay, now, if they're still heathen, then there's a big problem in reference to their doctrine. And he will rule over his own people in righteousness and wisdom. In their national assemblies, his word will be as the word of the angel. He will allow no unrighteousness to lodge in their midst. His subjects will be holy and sons of God, and he himself will be pure from sin, so that he may rule a great people. He will rebuke rulers, remove sinners by the might of his word, and relying upon his God throughout his days. He will not stumble, for God will make him mighty by means of his Holy Spirit. Several things, and this is still a quote from them, several things become clear from the picture of the Davidic Messiah. Several things become clear from this picture from the Davidic Messiah ruling in his kingdom. The first is that he is a thoroughly human figure who is above all a ruler and king who champions the cause of the people of Israel. So it's Psalm of Solomon, 1736, the name Messiah is used for the first time in this literature as the title of the coming king. So this indicates that at last, the expression of Messiah in its technical sense is brought into a relationship to the messianic concept. Moreover, the religious and moral side of his character is strongly stressed. Not only is he righteous and pure from sin, his reliance is placed upon his God, and his hope is in the Lord. So the kingdom which is establishes will have no end as viewed as similar lines, and as an earthly kingdom with Jerusalem as its center. So throughout the rest of the century, and right on to the first century, the Christian era, the figure of the Messianic king lived on in the hearts of many of the people. And as the New Testament itself makes all it clear, but no longer was he thought as a coming after God had established kingdom, rather was God's instrument in establishment of it, and his task was the destruction of God's enemies in the face of it. And again, like I said, that is nothing but premillennial. During this period, there arose in certain apostolic circles a belief in the interim of a messianic kingdom at the close of which the Messiah would die and God himself would reign supreme. But in the popular imagination, increasing stress was laid on the national political aspect of this work. The future hope was viewed, particularly in the times of persecution and national unrest, in terms of relevance, deliverance from the alien power of Rome, Matthew 21:9. Messiah was regarded by many as a military deliverer to the zealot type who would rid the country of their hated enemy. And so there arose a series of false messiahs who incited the people against the common foe. Hezekiah, the brigand, whom Herod executed, his son Judas the Galilean, and his brother Menahem, the prophet of Thaddeus, in the time of the procurator Cupius Freitas, in Acts 5, verse 36. The Egyptian Jew who was put to death by the procurator, Felix, Acts 21, verse 38. Another Jew who led his followers out of the wilderness in time of Festus, Simon Bar Kokhba, whose revolt was quelled in AD 135. So when you read from Second Ezra, chapter 7, beginning in verse 29, it says, "After these years shall my son Christ die, and all men have life, and the world shall be turned into the old silent 7 days, like as in the former judgment, so that no man shall remain in after 7 days. The world that you awaketh not shall be raised, and they shall that shall die and is corrupt, and the earth shall restore those that are asleep in her, and so shall the dust those that dwell in silence, and the secret places deliver those souls that were committed unto them. And the Most High shall appear in the seat of judgment, and misery shall pass away, the long suffering shall end, but the judgment only shall remain. Truth shall stand, and faith shall wax strong, and the work shall follow, and the reward shall be shown, and the good deeds shall be forced, and wicked deeds shall bear no root. In second address, chapter 12, verse 31, and the lion which I saw rising up out of the wood, and roaring and speaking to the eagle, and rebuking her for her unrighteousness, with all the words which thou hast heard. This is the anointing which the highest have kept from her, for her, and for their wickedness. In the end he shall reprove them, and shall upbraid them with their cruelty. For he shall set them before him alive in judgment, shall rebuke them and correct them. For the rest of my people shall be delivered with mercy, those that have been pressed upon the borders. He shall make them joyful unto the coming of the day of judgment, whereof I spoke unto them from the beginning. This is the dream that thou sawest, and these are the interpretations. Thou only has been meant to know the secret of the highest. Therefore, write all these things that thou hast seen in the book, and hide them, and teach them to the wise of the people, whose heart thou knowest may comprehend and keep these secrets. But wait thou here thyself yet 7 days more, that it may be shown thee whatsoever it pleaseth the highest to declare unto thee. And with that he went his way. Now in 2 Baruch chapter 30, verses 1 through 5, it says, and it will happen after these things, when the time of the appearance of the anointed one has been fulfilled, and he returns with glory, and then all who is asleep in hope will rise, and it will happen at that time that those treasuries will be opened, in the which number of souls of the righteous were kept, and they will go out, and the multitudes of souls will appear together in one assemblage of one mind, and the first ones will enjoy themselves, and the last ones will not be sad, for they know that the time has come of which it said that it is the end of time. But the soul of the wicked will the more waste away when they shall see all things, for they know that their torment has come, and that their perditions have arrived. So get a premillennial that. Now, then we look at the Messiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That brings us even closer now to that of New Testament times. We've already seen evidence for believing that the writer of the Testament, the 12 patriarchs, looked forward to the coming of the two Messiahs, one priestly and the other kingly, and again, that's not true. This belief, it would seem, was shared by the Covenanters of Qumran. And so, where incidentally fragments of an early form of the Testament of Levi written in Aramaic had been found, and in the Zadokite fragments, which undoubtedly belong to the same milieu, through discovery as much as earlier date, reference to making the coming of Messiah of Aaron in Israel, apparently 40 years after the gathered in of the teacher of righteousness. And the evidence in the Dead Sea Scrolls strongly suggests that the singular word here was originally read as a plural, and that the expectation of the writer was for a Messiah of Aaron, that is, priestly Messiah, and a Messiah of Israel, that is, a kingly Messiah, only Davidic. So this is at least is the belief expressed in the scrolls themselves. There is stated that the members of the community shall continue to live according to the original discipline until there shall come a prophet, and the Messiahs of Aaron and Israel, the manual of discipline according to them. Some scholars would here give the translation anointed one for the Messiahs, and make the phrase refer simply to the restoration of the true line of the Aaronic priests and the kings. But the indications are that two Messiahs are expected, whose coming would mark the new era for that of which the Covenanters had hoped and prayed, and the teacher of righteousness would seem was to be the forerunner of the Messiah. On his death would follow 40 years of bitter conflict between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, at the close of which the Messianic age would draw. Now, if you look at that 40 years, what they're saying, that could have been between that of the coming of the church in Acts 2 down to version, that would be 40 years. I'm not saying that is, but it says on his death would follow 40 years of bitter conflict. So that would be AD 30 to AD 70. So the belief of the Covenanters in a kingly and military Messiah was in keeping with the traditional hopes of the nation and had the support of many Old Testament prophecies. And so, but unlike the writer of the Testament, their belief in a priestly Messiah could not have arisen out of the admiration of the Hasmonean priesthood, priestly house of Levi, for they themselves were loyal sons of Zadok and looked forward to the coming of priestly Messiah of Zadok's line, which also represented the true high priestly office. So, such a belief in a priestly leader and a kingly leader would find precedent in the joint leadership of Joshua and Zerubbabel, the two sons of oil, in the early days of the Second Temple, Zechariah chapters 3 and 4. But moreover, in the scrolls, as in the Testaments, the priestly Messiah is given precedence over that of the kingly Messiah and recalls the relative positions of priest and king in the idea commonwealth of Ezekiel 40 to 48. Now, I made a note down here in reference to that, and I won't go over that because what he is saying is not true. This is indicated in a collection of benedictions from cave 1, in which blessings are given, one from the high priest and one from the prince of the congregation. The subordination and the kingly priesthood of kingly Messiah is made plain in fragments from the same cave related to the Messianic banquet. There we read, "Let no one begin to eat bread or drink wine before the priest, for it is his providence to bless the first mouthful of bread and wine, and to stretch forth his hands upon that bread. And thereafter the Messiah of Israel may stretch forth his hands upon the bread." And now, Ezekiel, when I taught Ezekiel, I thought it was very interesting. The last 9 chapters are a unit. It describes a vision of the new temple and of its buildings and walls and sacrificial implements, and along with priestly allotments of land and the priest's sacrificial duties. Now, when we talk about the priest, we're talking about the descendants of Aaron, that is the tribe of Levi. There are 4 ways that these chapters have been interpreted. In other words, literal, dispensational premillennialism, which is yet future. The symbolic Christian sees fulfillment in the church and the Christians as priests of God. Then in the apocalyptic, this allows for immediate application to the discouraged exiles. They were exiles. They were between the testaments. They were exiles to that of Babylonian and so forth, and even between that of the Testament. So therefore, it was there for that encouragement. This refers to the exile of Ezekiel as well as the king Jehoiakim, which took place in 598 BC. So the date here is given as April 28th, 573 BC. Now remember, chapter 29 and verse 17 is the prophecy. Ezekiel 29:7 is the prophecy against Egypt, and that it was dated April 571 BC. So some scholars have seen in the scrolls evidence for the resurrection of the teacher of righteousness after the 40 years travail and the eve of the Messianic age. If this is so, it's possible that the Covenanters thought of him in the same way in which popular traditions thought of Elijah. Elijah was a forerunner of the Messiah, although there is no indication at all that he is in any way to be identified with the prophet. Then there's Ezekiel is a great study in reference to try to help us with dates. It's amazing to dates. Then we find it go on in reference to what our fellow is saying, is that Jesus and the Messiah. Now, at the beginning of the Christian era, the vast majority of the Jews shared the belief in the coming of a mighty warrior Messiah of David's line. Okay? The grand Covenanters looked forward eagerly to the time when such a Messiah would lead them forth in great battle against a final battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. And the Zealots, too, were ready at any moment to flock to his standard and to fight by his side with naked swords. Small wonder that Jesus, from the time of his temptations onward, not only refused to proclaim himself Messiah, but discouraged others from using the title to him. He knew himself to be such, and later his disciples knew also, Mark 8, verse 29. But not until near the end of his life, when he stood before the high priest, did he acknowledge openly his Messiahship, Mark 14:61. Now, to have done so early would have led to complete misunderstanding, not only on the part of the people, but even on the part of his own disciples. And again, going to Acts chapter 1 and verse 6, it seems as if they still didn't understand things. They would when the Holy Spirit came upon them. But how different was his interpretation from that of the people of his day? not for him the role of a mighty warrior gaining his kingdom by bloodshed and war. You remember what he told Peter when he cut Malchus's ear off, put the sword up, that basically he'd already pointed out to them that his kingdom was not of this world. His kingdom would come not by taking life, but by giving it. As Caesarea Philippi, in reply to Peter's word, he says, "Thou art the Messiah." He made it clear that his messiahship would be fulfilled only in terms of the suffering Savior, which we'll talk about, who would give his life as a ransom for many, Mark 10 and verse 45. So such a correlation of these ideas were something new in Judaism. The true suffering servant and the kingly Messiah may have had common roots in the royal cultic rites as reflected, for example, in the Psalter, as scholars have suggested, but as Raleigh remarks, there is no serious evidence of bringing together the concepts of the servant Savior, suffering servant, and the divinic Messiah before the Christian era. So the two concepts were brought together in the thought and the teaching of Jesus. So here was a divine imperative from which he could not shrink. Jesus did not believe himself to be the Messiah, although he had to suffer. He believed himself to be the Messiah because he had to suffer. So this message of a crucified Messiah was to the Jews a stumbling block. Now that's what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. And to the Gentiles, foolishness, 1 Corinthians 1:23 beginning, but to those who are called, it was the power and the wisdom of God. So then we have the transcendent Messiah and the Son of God. Prior to 200 BC, as we have already seen, there had been growing up among the Jews an eschatology in many ways different from the national and political conception of the Old Testament, characterized by chiefly dualistic view of the universe, a belief in the resurrection and transcendental view of the golden age. So these new ideas continue to permeate the Jewish thought and were familiar and popular sometime before the beginning of the Christian era. So their influence on men's understanding of the Messiah began to be felt at an early age, even in writings where the old national political ideas were dominant. Transcendent characteristics tended to attach themselves to his person. Not only was he the military hero who would restore the Jewish state and establish the kingdom on earth, he would, I got to do something. I want to that in mind. And it will be also understood. He was the king of peace, under whose roof paradise would return to the earth. And there's testimony. We'll read that in a minute. I also found the Sibylline oracles. I found it. In certain apocalyptic circles, however, the influence of these ideas went further. For there the Messiah appears as a genuine transcendent king. Of particular importance is the emergence of a mysterious figure called the Man, or the Son of Man. That's an interesting study in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who, when you look at how he's referred to as a son, who, though different in origin and characteristics from the traditional Messiah, came to have a deep influence on the popular Messianic code. Now watch this in the Leviticus, or Levi 18:10 through 14. He shall open the gates of paradise. He shall remove the sword that has threatened since Adam, and he will grant to the saints to eat of the tree of life. The spirit of holiness shall be upon him, and Beliar shall be bound by him, and he shall grant to his children the authority to trample on wicked spirits, and the Lord will rejoice with his children. He will be well pleased by his beloved ones forever. Then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will rejoice, and I shall be glad, and all the saints shall be clothed in righteousness. So then you have the apocalyptic Son of Man. The figure of the Son of Man appears for the first time in apocalyptic literature in Daniel chapter 7:13. Tells of one like unto a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven to be presented before the Ancient of Days. Notice that word before. That is a very important word in Daniel. I'm going to put my black bold, it is. It is because of the Hal Lindsey, when he done his book, Late Great Planet Earth, what he did, he changed that. He made it this way. He says, tells one man like unto the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven to be presented from the Ancient of Days. And so, even before, because he's ascended back. That's talking about the ascension. So it is clear from reading this passage that the figure here mentioned is not the Messiah, and indeed that he is not an individual at all, but rather a symbol for the glorified Israel and the coming of the eschatological kingdom. He missed that because of his premillennial doctrine. In chapter 7, verse 18, the Son of Man is identified with the saints of the Most High. And this is supported by the symbolism of the passage. There, the dominion of the four kingdoms, symbolized by the four beasts, which emerge from the depths of the sea, passes over to the kingdom of the saints, where ideal people, symbolized by a heavenly, be it in human form, thus differentiated from that of the other kingdoms. Theirs is an everlasting dominion in the kingdom which shall not be destroyed. Scholars have pointed out that the vision of Daniel 7 has features which recall the book of Ezekiel chapter 1, where the phrase Son of Man occurs over 100 times, signifying man both in his creaturely weakness and in his glorious place in God's creation, Psalm 8, 4, and 5. Others have connections between the Son of Man, Daniel, and the suffering Savior, servant of Deuteronomy, Isaiah. There's no such thing. There's one Isaiah. In each case, the people of God are the wise who make the manly, any righteous. Once again has traced the Son of Man idea to the mythological sources in current Oriental thought, and in this way attempted to explain certain features which could not otherwise be understood. I want to see something. The next stage of the development in this idea is to be found in the similitudes of which is probably to be dated in the Maccabean area. Age. There had been much controversy of the question that suggested Christian interpolations, but there seemed some good reasons for believing that the book is a literary unit and that the so-called interpolations are in fact part of the text. The Son of Man is here presented as a heavenly being with no prior earthly existence at all, but he is pre-existent and having been created by God. You see that? Hasn't been created by God. Jehovah's Witness believes that Jesus was created by God. This may be where some of them get where that doctrine originally come from. Before the foundation of the world, he was created before the foundation of the world and hidden by him from the beginning. He is a divine creature whose face is full of graciousness and like one of the holy angels, upon whom God bestowed his only divine glory. But although he is divine, he may yet be thought of as a typical or ideal man who is, as the elect one, stands at the head of the elect ones in the heavenly kingdom. His character is marked by wisdom, understanding, and righteousness, and the righteous will one day be exalted to be with him, which with him are hidden all the secrets of the universe. The greatest secret is the Son of Man himself, who remains hidden, but will one day be revealed. Indeed, the secret has been revealed already to the elect. The time will come when the righteous one shall appear before the eyes of the righteous in all the splendor and be seated in the thrones of God's glory. He will stand before God as judge of heaven and earth and of angels, as well as the men of the dead, as well as the living. His appearing will bring deliverance to the godly, and they shall share the kingdom of the Son. Now, I'm not going to read all that stuff down through there. It's there if you want to read from go back from First Enoch chapters there. I put all that in there because you may not be able to find that. And I'm not going to read all of that because of the time. It has been claimed that this figure, I hope I get to finish this, it has been claimed that this figure of the Son of Man is an imaginative development of already given in Daniel 7. This view is supported by the fact that the description of God's throne in First Enoch 71 is largely derived from Ezekiel 1 and Daniel 7, and that the Son of Man passages read like a midrash or commentary on Daniel 7. Now, T.W. Manson interprets the Son of Man here as a collective symbol, as in Daniel 7, and believes that the same interpretation applies to the other names by which he called the righteous one, the elect one, the anointed one. So in a latter article, the same author sees in this a concept, both individual references. The idea finds expression in the remnant, the individual idea in two personality, Enoch himself, who is regarded as the nucleus of the elect one, and the Messiah, who will be the end of the vindicated of the saints. Now, Raleigh denies any reference here to the Messiah and recognizes this figure, the personifying of the Danielic concept of the Son of Man in a supreme mundane person who should be representative and head of the kingdom. That concept symbolized and should come down to dwell with men. Others like Mowinkle maintain that behind the Son of Man, as Daniel 7 stands the figure of the heavenly man or the pre-mortal man to be found in Oriental mythology, and that in First Enoch, the effects of its influence are much more obvious than that of Enoch, than that of the Daniel chapter 7. So you see, and I'm going to pass that up too, and you see in reference to that, in reference to what they're saying, is that their misconception, even this author, his misconception of what the prophets are all about. He has a different conception than we as Christians have today, because we realize, as Jesus said, that those things that were written in the law, written in the Psalms, and written in the prophets have been fulfilled. Luke 24 and verse 44. If it has been revealed, then we understand that, and therefore, by understanding that, we understand that their doctrine is not true. But what he's trying to do, what the authors are trying to do of the books that we've used, is try to point out to us what these writings say. And so that's what they're doing, even though they do believe in the premillennial doctrine. Let me get 5 and 6, and then we'll stop. The figure of the Son of Man appears again in the post-Christian apologetic writings, Second Eras, and the Sibylline oracles, Book 5, both which are influenced by the vision and the language of Daniel 7:13. So here, the figure of the Son of Man, in many respects, in line with what being given in the similitudes of Enoch, he is presented, however, as the Messiah, but this is no human figure of David's line. He is a pre-existent, transcendent figure who will one day appear before the righteous in all of his glory, and as in the similitudes of Enoch. So here, everything that pertains to the man, as he is called, is a divine secret. Or just as one can neither seek out nor know what is the deep of the sea, even so can one know no one up on the earth see my son, but in the time of his day, Isaiah 15:32. And in that day he will come flying with the clouds of heaven, 13:3, and will emerge from the depths of the sea, 13:51. Well, we know he'll come from the clouds. We know that's contrary to the Bible. In him, the mysteries of the God's purpose are concealed. And next week we will talk about the mystery from a biblical standpoint. But when he sits on the throne of God, what is hidden will be at last be revealed. So the popularity of this transcendent figure was no doubt much more restricted than the new eschatology, which is formed a part, but his influence will be felt outside the confined apocalyptic to which it belonged. To what extent, however, this influence was felt, it is impossible to say. In the course of time, the Christian era, it was regarded with increasing disfavor in the Orthodox circles, no doubt partly because of its use among the Christians, and particularly no place in the subsequent history of Jewish theology. We'll start there in part B, on page 273, Lord willing, next week. We've made up some of our time. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you what we were going to do. We're going to do all this that we've got in our notes. And then we're going to get down to, on page 279, we're going to talk about the mystery of God. Now, so we should have probably talked about the mystery of God before all of this, but in the first time that I taught this between the Testament, it's just you learn as you go. So we'll talk about that, and after we talk about the history of God, we're going to talk about the suffering servant from Isaiah 52 to Isaiah 53 by Brother Blight, who we have a member of the church that has done a great study on that. And so we're going to deal with those passages from Isaiah, and then we're going to talk about the reference of the resurrection and life beyond, and that will conclude. Hopefully that we can get through with that next week. And that will give us our last week to look at some special things in reference to what the Bible really says about some of these. Okay? So it's 8:59. If I were to keep you another minute, it would be 15 minutes. But we started early.
Good to go, Bobby.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you, Bobby. We'll see you later.
All right.